Right now, 250 miles up in the air, there's an outfit that costs more than your house, has more layers than an onion, and is the only thing standing between you and instant death. This isn't just a fashion statement. It's a spacecraft that you wear to keep yourself alive. If you haven't guessed already, I am talking about the modern spacesuit, one of humanity's greatest achievements. So, how did you build it? Let's just say that it was one giant leap for suit kind. Hi everybody! Welcome back to the Space Blast, and my name is Sathik Ranjanagi, and I'll be your host for today's video. With that, let's cue the intro. I bet you that you've heard about the spacesuit before sometime in your life, whether it be the iconic orange ones used on the space shuttle or the white bulky ones used on spacewalks. You've heard of them before. So if I were to ask you, what is a spacesuit? What would you say? Probably something like a piece of clothing that helps protect astronauts from space. But is it really just a piece of clothing? Is it really that simple? You're absolutely right. It's not that simple and it's not easy. There's a whole lot of complicated stuff required to bring you alive in space. So that begs the question, what is a spacesuit? Well, officially, this is an environmental suit, a highly specialized pressure suit used to protect you from the vacuum of space. And trust me, space throws a lot of things at you, just like that. So, what can space throw at you? Well, first of all, you gotta deal with the vacuum of space. If you somehow get thrown into the void of space, you're gonna realize that there's no air and no pressure. Your blood would start boiling and you'd lose consciousness in about 15 seconds due to the lack of air. But let's just say you become Hulk for the day and survive that. You're gonna have to deal with the extreme temperatures. Facing the sun, you're gonna be burned alive with temperatures up to 250 degrees Fahrenheit. Staying in the shade, not safe either. You're gonna deal with temperatures below 387 degrees Fahrenheit. That's right, negative 300 degrees Fahrenheit. That's cold. So take your pick. Want to freeze or burn alive? Me? Neither. I want to live. So that's why the spacesuit provides two things that are needed most: air and internal pressure. Now there's more to the suit, but for now those are the two main things. And did I also mention, they also provide a system to collect your bodily waste. That's the reason they call it a maximum absorbency garment. And spacewalks need more than just a spacesuit. They need a spacesuit that can handle ultraviolet rays, protect you from micrometeorites, and have the ability to dock, tether, attach, and maneuver a spacesuit at any time. The spacesuit isn't just a piece of clothing. It's a one-man spacecraft, and you're the only passenger. And here's the crazy part. The entire suit, including all those layers, is less than 1/10 of an inch thick. And that's including the three major layers. First, we've got the bladder. Nope, not the one in your stomach. The bladder is an airtight, rubbery layer that stores pressurized oxygen. The second layer, the restraint layer, gives the suit its shape and protects you from the bladder, because without it, all that pressurized oxygen in the bladder would blow up like a balloon. And trust me, I don't want to look like a balloon on the job. And the third and final layer is the thermal and micrometeorite layer. When a micrometeorite hits you, like this, it breaks up into tiny jets and gets absorbed by the suit or gets dispersed. Underneath it all, astronauts will be wearing a liquid cooling and ventilation garment. This bodysuit is equipped with piping which will flow chilled water during special parts of a mission to cool the astronauts. And here's where it gets interesting. Most people think there's only one kind of suit that's meant to be used only outside of a spacecraft, the white one that I'm wearing right now. But that's not the case. There's a whole family of suits, and not knowing which one is which could cost you your life. So pay attention. The first type of suit that we have is the IVA suit. This suit stands for Intravehicular Activity Suit. This suit is only meant to be used inside of a spacecraft. So what's the purpose, you may say? Well, during launch and re-entry, if the cabin loses air for any reason, this suit will provide suitable living conditions until the astronauts come back to Earth safely. Some famous examples of these suits would be the iconic orange suits used on the space shuttle and the iconic suits used on SpaceX missions. The next suit that we're going to talk about is the EVA suit, the suit that we all know and love. The EVA suit stands for Extravehicular Activity, and by the name, you probably could guess that this suit is meant to be used outside of a spacecraft. This suit is meant to be used only outside of a spacecraft, not inside. And some famous examples of these would be the ones used on the ISS and the ones used on the moon. And finally, the last type of suit that we have is the IEVA suit, which stands for Extravehicular Activity Suit. This suit, like the name probably suggests, is a hybrid. It can be used both inside and outside of a spacecraft. Some famous examples of these would be the Gemini G4C suits, but I think I also have an example. Recently, SpaceX created their own EVA suit, which the Polaris Dawn crew wore. But the Polaris Dawn crew did not have a separate IVA suit. Instead, they wore these EVA suits for the entire mission. So that's why I think the Polaris Dawn suits or the EVA suits manufactured by SpaceX are an IEVA suits. But what do you think? Should it be an EVA suit or an IEVA suit? Let me know down in the comments below. I will be happy to hear them. But where are these suits used? Well, for the IVA suit, we already know that it's going to be used inside of a spacecraft. But for the EVA suit, there's a much different story. Take, for example, the International Space Station, the orbiting laboratory that has been serviced since November 2nd of 2000. They have conducted many spacewalks on the orbiting laboratory. And how do you think that's all done? With spacesuits, of course. Yep, that's right. Spacesuits are used in low Earth orbit, not just on the ISS, but on the Chinese space station. And it was also used on the Polaris Dawn mission. And then we have the lunar missions. Rewinding back into the 1960s, we will see that Neil Armstrong walked on the moon with a spacesuit. So these spacesuits aren't just for the low Earth orbit. They can also be used on the moon and in the future on Mars. In fact, a company called Axiom Space is going to be developing the AX-EMU suit for the Artemis 4 mission, the mission that will land the first woman and person of color on the moon. They say that their suits will be able to handle 90% of the US male and female population. Why does that matter? Because back then, suits were not designed for comfort. Suits were so expensive. They came in only 3 different sizes: large, medium, and small. And if you didn't fit them, too bad. But with Axiom Space, they want to solve this problem by introducing custom suits tailored to the astronaut's demands. And honestly, I think the future is looking the same for all companies. So, what's the backstory behind these suits? How did they come to be? Well, the origin of the spacesuit would start in the 1930s when a few early engineers started designing the first ever high-altitude suits. Then, in the 1950s, we would see this model being designed and tested instead of vacuum chambers. Then, in 1961, the first ever man to step into space, Yuri Gagarin, would go wearing a spacesuit, the SK spacesuit made by the Soviet Union. NASA would follow behind with NASA astronaut Alan Shepard becoming the first American to go into space wearing a modified Navy suit. Then we would see the spacewalk of Alexei Leonov, the first Soviet Union astronaut to do so and the first ever person in history. This would happen 4 years after the first man in space. NASA once again would follow behind with NASA astronaut Ed White becoming the first American to commit a spacewalk. He was tethered to an oxygen tank inside the spacecraft, supplying him oxygen, which I think is the perfect example of an EVA suit. Anyways, all jokes aside, the spacesuit had a major hurdle with the Apollo program. The Apollo program was challenging and demanding. Lots of considerations had to be put on the spacesuit. Not only was it the first time a spacesuit would be far from its spacecraft, it would also have to endure the frigid temperatures on the moon and be able to work on its own. But successfully, NASA did build a test article which turned into a spacesuit. And Neil Armstrong would walk on the moon wearing the NASA built spacesuit, saying the famous words, "That's one small step for a man, one giant leap for mankind." And this suit was the reason those words weren't a one-way ticket instead. Then came the shuttle program, ironically, the program that built the most spacesuits. This program started with the ejection suits for the early two-man missions. Then, from STS-26 and onwards, they built the advanced crew capability suits. Then, in 1994, the Space Shuttle program had another debut with the advanced launch and re-entry suits. And then we would see the EMU suits being used from 1982 and still being used today on the ISS. And then came SpaceX. In 2015, they wanted to build a sleek, futuristic spacesuit. In 2018, their space dummy, Starman, would be the first person, I guess, to wear this spacesuit. Then in 2020, NASA astronauts Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley would be the actual astronauts to wear these spacesuits for the first time, going into space and successfully bridging the gap from the Space Shuttle program to the first commercial crew program. Then in 2024, SpaceX would start designing a EVA suit. And just like the IVA suit, it looks very similar. And it would be used on the Polaris Dawn mission, the first ever commercial spacewalk. And don't worry, the Soviet Union and Russia aren't the only countries designing spacesuits. China is also using spacesuits for their Tiangong space station. So the next time you zip up your favorite jacket, remember, there's a person floating 250 miles above your head, wearing a spacesuit that is 11 layers, 1/10 of an inch thick, with the humanity on one side and one brave person on the other. It's really something to admire at. And, honestly, we might be the best dressed planet in the solar system. So what do you think? What is the coolest spacesuit fact you've heard about? Please make sure to let me know down in the comment section below. And while you're at it, please make sure to hit the like and subscribe button and smash that notification bell to receive daily updates on future content that I post. Thank you so much for joining the Space Blast. You rock! Until then, see you next time.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Ignition. Liftoff of the Falcon 9 and Crew Dragon. Go NASA, go SpaceX, Godspeed, Spot and Doug.
America has launched. So rises a new era of American spaceflight, and with it the ambitions of a new generation continuing the dream. 20 seconds into flight, stage 1 propulsion is nominal.
30 seconds into this historic mission. Flying crew on board Dragon and Falcon 9, and look at them go!
Falcon power function nominal. M1D throttle down.
We're throttling down to get ready for the period of maximum dynamic pressure. We're in the throttle bucket. Reports say all systems are